On a tense day in Bamako, Mali's authorities summoned Sweden's ambassador and gave her a clear deadline: 72 hours to leave the country. In the same diplomatic move, they sent an indirect but unmistakable message to Western capitals after months of criticisms over Mali's growing security partnership with Russian-linked actors and its decision to sever ties with Ukraine. Sweden had already announced that it would discontinue its bilateral development aid strategy with Mali while keeping limited humanitarian support, citing Mali's links with Russia and its position on the war in Ukraine. In Bamako, Mali's foreign ministry publicly branded the Swedish minister's comments hostile, framing the aid decision and the criticism as an unacceptable challenge to Mali's sovereign choices. This episode is not just about one ambassador and one deadline. It reflects how a Sahel state that once depended heavily on European troops, UN peacekeepers, and development funds is now openly reshaping its external alliances, even at the cost of sharper tension with Western partners. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into how this 72-hour expulsion became another front line in a wider struggle over influence in the Sahel, how Mali's gradual shift away from European security frameworks towards Moscow emerged from years of frustration, and why this confrontation could influence how African states negotiate with former colonial powers going forward. We will also look at what this showdown means inside the new Sahel alliance formed by Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, whose leaders portray themselves as defenders of sovereignty against foreign pressure. And we will explore a question many Africans are debating. When ambassadors leave and aid is reduced, does this mark a step towards real autonomy for Mali, or does it risk creating new forms of dependence while ordinary people still struggle with schools, clinics, and basic services? Stay with me. On a tense morning in Bamako, Mali's foreign ministry summoned Sweden's ambassador and delivered a firm message. She had 72 hours to leave the country. For a state that had maintained relations with multiple European partners for years, issuing that kind of deadline marked a serious escalation. It signaled that Mali's leadership was willing to confront a European government in public, not only through private notes or closed-door discussions. Sweden, while it's not the largest Western actor in Mali, has been part of the broader European and multilateral presence in the Sahel through aid, EU missions, and contributions to international relations. The expulsion did not come out of nowhere. Days earlier, Sweden's Minister for International Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade publicly confirmed that Sweden would phase out its development aid strategy for Mali, linking the decision to Mali's stance on Russia's war in Ukraine and its ties with Moscow. Mali's foreign ministry described his comments as hostile and objected to what it saw as interference in its sovereign foreign policy choices. Diplomatic expulsions with 72-hour deadlines are among the strongest tools a state can use, short of breaking relations entirely. They turn a dispute over statements and aid into a visible line that other states and audiences cannot ignore. This moment is not just an isolated clash. It rests on years of accumulated frustration, contested narratives about security and aid, and shifting alliances that have changed how Mali views France, Europe more broadly, and the international security order in the Sahel. That deeper story starts long before this ambassador received her expulsion notice. Before Mali began expelling diplomats, foreign troops and missions were already being asked or required to leave. After the 2012 crisis and subsequent instability, France, the European Union, the United Nations, and individual European states helped to shape Mali's security and development landscape. Operation Sever and Barkhane the UN peacekeeping mission MINUSWA, EU training missions, and a wide range of aid programs funded by European partners, including Sweden. On paper, this network was described as partnership. But on the ground, however, jihadist violence persisted in many areas, and critics in Mali argue that international forces were containing rather than resolving insecurity. As attacks continued and rural areas remained difficult to secure, demonstrations in Bamako increasingly targeted both national authorities and foreign missions, especially France. Protesters used Pan-African symbols and, at times, Russian flags to express anger at what they saw as neo-colonial attitudes and double standards in Western engagements. Public debates questioned why extensive foreign deployments and large financial commitments had not delivered lasting safety for civilians. It's a bit like having layers of security locks on your door, but break-ins keep happening anyway. People start asking what those locks are really doing. Over time, the word partner became contested. Western governments presented conditional aid and political pressure as necessary tools to support governance and rights, while many Malians viewed some of those conditions as external interference. After a military-led government came to power, authorities in Bamako drew on these sentiments, presenting decisions to end French military operations, request the withdrawal of MINUSMA, and renegotiate external ties as step towards reclaiming sovereignty. In that context, the expulsion of Sweden's ambassador is one more step in a longer process, a move away from Europe's security umbrella and towards alternative partnerships, most notably with Russia, that now play a central role in Mali's strategy. As French troops wound down Operation Barkhane and European missions scaled back, reports began to document the arrival of Russian-linked security contractors and advisors in Mali. Satellite imagery, local testimonies, and official statements refer to new security partnerships and deliveries of military equipment as Bamako signaled a reorientation of its external alliances. For Mali's transactional authorities, this was presented as more than a simple replacement of one partner with another. It was framed as diversification of options in a context where previous arrangements were seen as insufficient. From a regional and Pan-African perspective, Russia has been increasingly portrayed by some actors in the Sahel as an alternative pole, which is a major power that was not a former colonial ruler in West Africa and that has been willing to work with military-led governments under sanctions or political pressure from Western institutions. Supporters argue that Russian engagement has brought military equipment, training, and political backing at a moment when jihadist armed groups remain active and national forces are under strain. Critics, including rights organizations and some international partners, have raised concerns about alleged abuses, the lack of clarity of contracts, and the risk that dependence on a single security provider could create new vulnerabilities. Inside Mali, reactions are mixed and hard data remain limited in public sources. But the partnership with Russia has become central to official messaging about security and sovereignty. Now, this alignment sits uneasily with positions taken by European states, such as Sweden, which are tied into EU and NATO policies on Russia and have condemned Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The key question now is how far Mali will go to maintain this security relationship when European partners respond with cuts in development, its aid, and diplomatic pressure. To many observers, the decision to expel Sweden's ambassador may appear unusual at first glance. Sweden is not a former colonial power in Mali and has not been the most visible Western presence in public protests. But in diplomatic practice, smaller European states can still become focal points when they align with wider EU positions and make public statements that local authorities perceive as crossing a line. Sweden has contributed to multilateral efforts in Mali and the Sahel, including participation in EU missions and development initiatives. Now, when the Swedish minister publicly linked Mali's stance on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its ties with Moscow to Sweden's decision to phase out development aid, Bamako interpreted this as an attempt to use aid as leverage over its foreign policy choices. Mali's foreign ministry responded by calling the remark hostile and summoning the ambassador before announcing that she had 72 hours to leave. In its official statement, Mali framed the move as a reaction to Sweden's position on Mali's decision regarding Ukraine and Russia, and as a defense of national sovereignty. From a Pan-African perspective, the image of a Sahel government ordering a European envoy to depart after a dispute over aid and alliances has been used by supporters to illustrate a broader pushback against what they view as unequal relationships. For many Western diplomats and analysts, the expulsion underscored how quickly relations can deteriorate when development policy is directly tied to geopolitical disputes. The most striking element for them was not only the expulsion itself, but the fact that it came amid Mali's deepening cooperation with Russia and its break in relations with Ukraine. Mali's authorities have not issued a formal statement using the exact phrase, "We will not cut ties with Russia," but their recent decisions and public messaging leaving little doubt that relations with Moscow are a priority they intend to protect. While severing diplomatic ties with Ukraine and reacting sharply to criticisms from Sweden, Bamako has continued to highlight cooperation with Russia in security and other areas. In this context, the expulsion of Sweden's ambassador can be seen as part of a broader pattern in which Mali resists Western pressure over its choices of partners. In Western capitals, Russia's expanding footprint in Africa is widely analyzed as part of a global context involving security contractors, arms sales, media operations, and diplomatic outreach. From that vantage point, Mali's refusal to adjust its Russia policy despite aid cuts and political pressure fits into a larger picture of Moscow gaining influence in regions where European and North American actors have traditionally played leading roles. Inside Mali and neighboring countries, many supporters of the current authorities describe Russia's government as providing security assistance and political backing without the same public conditionality on domestic politics that often accompanies Western aid. They argue that a sovereign state should be free to choose its partners, even when those choices provoke criticism. That resonates with a broader Pan-African narrative that rejects what it's seen as paternalistic treatment, especially when security conditions remain difficult despite years of foreign involvement. The trade-offs are significant. Reductions in development aid and diplomatic friction on one side, and on the other, a security relationship that Mali's authorities consider central to their current strategy. Other states in the Sahel are watching closely and, in some cases, adopting similar positions as part of emerging regional realignments. Mali is not facing these tensions with Western partners in isolation. Together with Burkina Faso and Niger, it has created the Alliance of Sahel States, a grouping launched through a mutual defense pact signed in 2023 and further developed in 2024. The three revolutionary leaders present the alliance as a framework for enhanced security cooperation and as a vehicle for asserting sovereignty in their dealings with foreign powers and regional organizations. Across West Africa and the Sahel, frustration has grown over years of conflict, economic hardships, and unmet expectations from international interventions. Many young people and civil society actors, particularly in urban centers, have voiced anger at what they perceive as unequal partnerships and at the limited impact of decades of stabilization and development programs. In this environment, messages about standing up to former colonial powers and renegotiating the terms of engagement find a ready audience. So, within the alliance, closer ties with Russia and a tougher line towards European and some regional institutions have become part of a shared posture. Joint communiques, coordinated diplomatic positions, and discussions on projects such as shared telecommunications satellites with Russia's support signal an effort to move away from exclusive reliance on traditional partners. Against this backdrop, Mali's expulsion of Sweden's ambassador functions not only as a diplomatic dispute between two states, but also as a message about how these governments intend to respond to criticisms linked to their Russia policies and governance choices. What remains uncertain is how this strategy will play out in practice. For ordinary residents coping with price increases and service gaps, for regional security, and for continental debate over Africa's place in a changing international order. The ambassador's 72-hour deadline, the reduction in Swedish development aid, and Mali's sharpened stance towards some Western partners mark a clear turning point in their relations. But the longer-term consequences are still unfolding. Mali's decision to maintain and deepen cooperation with Russia while confronting critics in Europe has made the country a prominent case in discussions about how African states manage external alignments under pressure. On one side, there are tangible risks. Cuts to bilateral development programs can affect funding available for education, health, infrastructure, and governance projects, particularly when alternative financing is limited. International investors and some multilateral lenders may adopt a more cautious approach in response to political tensions and security concerns. Rights organizations and analysts have also raised questions about accountability and transparency in operations involving new security partners, including Russian-linked forces. Now, on the other side, Mali's leadership and its allies argue that diversifying partnerships and pushing back against conditionality could, over time, create more space to negotiate arrangements that reflect local priorities rather than externally defined agendas. For many Pan-African observers, the core issue is whether this strategy can eventually deliver improved security, fairer economic deals, and stronger respect for African agency, or whether it will instead produce fresh vulnerabilities tied to new external dependencies. In the coming months and years, other African governments will monitor Mali's trajectory and the alliance experiments. Some may view it as a model of assertive foreign policy. Others may see it as a cautionary example of the costs of confrontation. For audiences across the continent and in the diaspora, the central question remains open. Does this path lead towards more autonomous African diplomacy or towards a reconfigured form of dependence in a shifting global landscape? This is Frontline Africa. If this kind of unfiltered Africa First analysis resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. And drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. My name is P. Solomon, and I'll see you in the next one.